Fire! Show them who owns this place, the HOA president shouted with her arms crossed as the guard pointed his gun at my daughter right outside the neighborhood gate. But with one swift badge pull, Elena said coldly, "You just aimed a gun at the FBI tactical commander." The crowd fell silent, false power collapsing under real justice. Sometimes fairness arrives in a single second, stripping the mask off the arrogant. What state are you in? If it were you, would you walk away or stand your ground? I had grown used to coming home in silence. The road was lined with evenly spaced trees, their shadows falling over the sidewalk, where soft light stretched quietly across every tiled section. Each house looked like a replica, matching roof tiles, neatly trimmed lawns, straight white fence, everything so perfect, soulless. People like to call this place a paradise for successful families, but that flawless order had never brought me peace. I had long understood that behind the polished paint and polite smiles lay a quiet, rotting authority, one not born from law, but from those who claimed the right to rule simply because they had secured a seat at the top of the food chain in this gold-plated cage. My car turned onto the main road toward home, its wheels rolling slowly through flickers of light under the street. Night had fully settled in, the sunset gone, leaving only a faint red glow simmering behind the Beside me, Elena sat in silence, still in her uniform after a long day at the unit. Her hair was back, a few strands loose, doing nothing to soften her stern presence. Her face showed clear fatigue, but she remained calm. She didn't speak, just stared ahead with cold, focused eyes. She just wanted to get home, eat dinner, and rest. No one imagined that an evening like any other could turn into a confrontation without. As we neared the house, that shadow darted out from the guard post beside the main gate. A heavy-set man, broad-shouldered and bulky, dressed in black with the faded words HOA Security stamped across his chest. He raised his hand to signal us to stop, without the slightest hint of professionalism or the basic respect expected from someone in a service role. His face was marked with harsh lines, his eyes shifty yet smug, like he'd just caught a whiff of something filthy. I rolled the window down, keeping my voice as calm as possible. "Is there a problem?" He tilted his head, squinting at the car, then gave us a once-over with a look that barely hid his contempt. A slow smirk crept across his face, laced with carefully measured insult. "This car doesn't really fit the upscale image of our neighborhood," he said. I froze. That sentence echoed in my head like a slap. Elena turned her head, her eyes flashing with anger, but she said nothing. I swallowed the rising fury, forcing myself to stay calm. "This is my car. I live here. What else do you need to know?" He stepped closer, now less than 2 feet from the window. "You should remember," he said slowly, his tone threat. "Around here, the property values are higher than your lifetime salary." Every word landed like a jab at my pride, trying to grind down what little dignity I still had left. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, not just because of the insult aimed at me, but because he was talking about Elena, my daughter, who had shed sweat, blood, and peace of mind to uphold order and the law, being degraded by some uneducated man with a gun, guarding a gate as if she were filth. Elena kept her back straight, eyes locked on him, sharp as blades, but still said nothing. She was waiting for me to speak, or maybe holding back something greater, a trained instinct not to act on impulse. He snorted, and his right hand moved slowly to his hip, touching the gun. He didn't draw it, just rested his hand on it, but it was enough to threaten. I saw the satisfaction in his eyes as tension thickened around our car. He wanted fear. He wanted me to yield. This wasn't the first time he'd done this, I realized. The way he stood, spoke, and reached for his weapon, smooth, practiced, was the mark of someone used to enforcing power through intimidation. "I keep this neighborhood clean," he said, voice low and seething through his "People like you and your daughter only dirty this community." I spoke through clenched teeth. No need to raise my voice. "Take your hand off the gun. You've crossed the line." He let out a dry laugh, one that felt like it was spat in our faces. "I'm the law here. One word from me and the HOA will make sure you don't belong." I knew he wasn't bluffing. Around here, the HOA, the Homeowners Association, could hang residents out to dry with vague rules and fabricated violations. They controlled through paperwork, but men like him enforced it with weapons and threat. More than a few families had quietly moved out after being harassed beyond endurance, and now it was my turn. Elena turned to look at me, not a trace of fear in her eyes, only a reminder that she was here, that she wouldn't let me face this alone. I gave her a slight nod, an unspoken agreement, but I also knew that if things spun out of control, consequences wouldn't stop at personal harm. This was a neighborhood of silent watchers behind. I could already see a few windows slightly cracked open, a few shadows quietly observing, but no one stepped out, no one spoke up. In this place, silence was a culture. The guard growled again, hand still on his gun. "This is your last warning. Get Get out if you want to live in peace. This place is for people who know their place. I felt my body tighten like a drawn wire. Elena stayed silent, but her eyes were steel, unshaken, unafraid. She had seen too much out there to be rattled by a man in uniform playing pretend just. I didn't hold back anymore. Looking him dead in the eyes, I spoke slowly, my voice low enough for only him to hear, heavy enough to cut through. You're making yourself a criminal, and if you think I'll bow, you've picked the wrong man. He clenched his teeth, madness flashing in his eye. But right then, Elena tilted her head slightly, her right hand sliding toward her waistband, where she always kept a small folding knife, not to attack, but as a quiet reminder to the world that she was never powerless. I knew, one move from him, and Elena would act, and this time, he wouldn't have the chance to toy with power. I spoke one last time, each word landing like a weight on the ground. Take your hand off the gun, now. He looked at me, then at Elena. No one moved. Time froze in what felt like the longest 10 seconds of my life. The gate light cast straight onto his face, and I saw, in that light, Elena's hand shifted slightly. Not fast, not sudden, just a small motion, but enough for me to understand. My daughter was ready, and once she moved, no one, not even the man holding the gun, would have time to regret it. I hadn't yet finished swallowing my anger at the guard when, from a distance, a striking figure began approaching. The yellow light spilled onto the brick-paved street, and each step of her heels echoed like a hammer of authority. Her light-colored suit stood out against the dark, face heavily made up, so meticulously done it became disturbingly fake. It only took a few steps for me to realize it wasn't a coincidence. She walked in like a lead actress entering on cue to deliver a scene of calculated humiliation. Yes, hold them there, her voice rang out, cold and sharp as a blade. People like this ruin the value of the neighborhood. The line wasn't a command to the guard. It was a message to the crowd, now slowly gathering. I looked around. From the nearby houses, curtains parted slightly. A few faces peeked out, some silent, some sneering. A few phones rose, screens flickering in the dark. It felt like I was standing in an open-air courtroom with the crowd as jury and the woman striding toward us as the self-appointed prosecutor. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice level. My daughter and I live here. We're legal residents. If there's an issue, take it through official channel. Folded her arm, her eyes sliding from me to Elena, then back again, full of contempt. Someone like you? You only disgrace this community. Her smile curled upward, fake and vicious, as if every word had been rehearsed to humiliate. Elena gently squeezed my hand beneath the car window. She didn't need to speak. I knew she was holding herself back. Her eyes were glowing in the dark like suppressed embers. I knew my daughter's strength, but I also knew how deeply she hated watching this unfold. The HOA president took a few more steps, stopping at the front of the car, looking at me with the expression of someone delivering a sentence. I've said it many times before, she said bitterly. This neighborhood isn't for those who bring mediocrity. We protect value, and we reserve the right to remove anyone who contaminates this. The guard stood beside her, hand still on the gun, like a loyal dog ready to strike. He glanced at her, waiting for instruction, while she smiled with the confidence of a queen, fully aware that the power she held had become a weapon to control an entire community. I lifted my head and looked her straight in the eyes, unwilling to let the shame go any further. What are you saying? My family's done nothing wrong. This is my home. We have every right to be here, just like anyone else. Home? She laughed, the sound sharp and cutting. A tiny unit with a pathetic patch of grass? Don't kid yourself. Around here, real value lies in money flow, in status. You think a cheap car and a tired face can blend into this community? Absolutely not. The crowd behind her chuckled, whispers rippling out. I saw a flash of anger in Elena's eyes, and her grip on my hand tightened, as if to say, one more word, and she wouldn't be able to hold back. But the woman didn't stop. I don't do this because I enjoy it. I do it for the whole community, she went on, her voice rising like she was delivering a sermon. We pay premium prices to live here, and we demand a pure environment. People who don't meet the standard drag down property value, and I will not let that happen. I felt fury rise like a tidal wave. I'd grown used to quiet discrimination, but never something this blatant. The way she said, "Don't meet the standard," felt like a stamp stripping away human worth. Elena stared at her, eyes cutting straight through the carefully painted mask. I clenched my jaw, my voice dropping, no longer restrained. You don't have the right to decide who's worthy and who's not. This is a community, not your private kingdom. She tilted her head, smile curling, eyes gleaming with satisfaction. You're wrong. Here, I am the law. I set the standards, and I won't let a family like yours ruin this reputation." The words hit my ears like acid, setting my blood boiling. I looked at Elena and saw her give a slight nod, a silent reassurance, but I also noticed her hand trembling. Not fear, but from anger pushed to its breaking point. The air was thick now. Every sneer from the neighbors sliced deeper into our dignity. It was clear this wasn't just a personal clash. It was a full-blown display of the HOA's abusive power, with the president center stage. She took one more step, her voice cold, aimed to pierce like a knife. "If you don't like it, you can move. There are hundreds of families waiting to take place, and believe me, they're worth far more than you." Elena turned to me, her eyes no longer holding back. What was once a restraint had turned into a resolve. I knew that inside her, the thread of patience was stretched so tight, it would only take the smallest force to snap it completely. I held my head high and responded, no longer aiming for diplomacy. "We're not going anywhere. This is our home. No matter how loud you shout, the truth doesn't change." The HOA president stared at me, the smile on her lips turning stiff. She hadn't expected me to push back in front of the crowd. For a split second, I saw anger flash in her eyes, quickly masked by a look of disdain. My daughter still held my hand, anchoring us both against the storm. I knew this was only the beginning. The way she had approached, the way the crowd followed her lead, everything signaled that a far more brutal storm was still coming. The guard took another step forward, the gun now drawn from its holster, the cold metal glinting clearly under the lights. He growled, his voice hoarse and scraping like iron on glass. "Don't move!" "One more step and I'll shoot." My chest tightened, breath caught in my throat. Right in front of me, the black barrel was aimed directly at Elena, my daughter, the same baby I once cradled in my arm, now facing down the muzzle of a weapon held by someone who had appointed himself security enforcer. I felt the blood in my body freeze, my feet locked to the ground. Only the sound of my racing heartbeat thundering in my ear. Elena stood firm. Her face was so cold it scared me, not because it showed weakness, but because it didn't. Her eyes never wavered. She stared at the man, pointing the gun like he was nothing more than dust floating in the wind. The crowd of neighbors swelled, whispers turning into a low buzz. Few phones rose, screens casting blue light into the dark. They were recording, but not one of them stepped forward. No one shouted. They chose silence, a wall of indifference closing in around us. In that suffocating moment, the HOA president folded her arms and spoke, her voice high and syrupy, laced with venom. "Go ahead, show them who's in charge here." I felt my blood boil. In a few words, she had turned my daughter's life into a show of dominance, a prop to assert control. No amount of makeup or pastel suits could cover the cruelty underneath. This wasn't arrogance anymore. It was sick, twisted authoritarianism. Elena took a breath, then stepped forward, each step deliberate enough to steal the air from the entire street. I almost reached out to stop her, but the look in her eyes froze me. In those eyes, I saw absolute control. She wasn't acting on emotion. She knew exactly when it was time to move. Her hand slowly pulled a small object from her jacket pocket. The badge caught the light, its embossed letters bold and unmistakable. Her voice rang out cold as ice, slicing through his arrogance. "You just pointed a gun at the FBI tactical commander." Silence exploded across. The whispers died, and I saw the guard blinking fast, his finger on the trigger beginning to tremble. His face went pale, like he had just realized stepped onto a path with no way back. The HOA president hesitated. Her triumphant smile flickered out for a second, but she let out a sharp laugh, trying to look unfazed. "FBI? So what? Around here, I am the law. Don't think a badge is going to scare me." Elena didn't respond right away. She just looked at her with eyes sharp as blades, then turned to the guard. Her voice was low, but every word dropped like a stone. "Get on your knees. Drop the weapon. This is not a game." The guard swallowed hard, his lips moving but no sound coming out. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, one side foolish delusion, the other a chasm of just waiting to devour him. I stood beside him, overwhelmed with conflicting emotion. I was terrified for my daughter, deeply proud. Elena stood tall, her FBI badge gleaming, her voice unwavering. Every insult thrown at us before now vanished. I realized that this hollow community had never witnessed real power until this moment. The crowd stirred again. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, she's actually FBI?" Others moved closer, phones raised to capture every faces that once smirked now showed fear. The HOA president remained rooted in place, stubborn as stone. Her voice dropped into a harsh snarl, clinging to what little authority she had left. "You think some fancy FBI label makes me bow down? This is my neighborhood. I decide what happens. Security answers to me, not to you." Elena gave a faint smile, thin but loaded with contempt. "You just admitted everything. You've been using the HOA as a weapon to intimidate residents. But the performance ends here." The guard trembled, lowering the gun slightly, eyes darting around in panic. He He realized there was nowhere left to turn. Fear began to consume him, even as he struggled to keep himself from collapsing. I glanced around at the neighbors' faces. Some had already shifted, no longer amused but stunned. They were watching the woman they had once feared publicly unmasked. Relief slowly swelled in my chest. The fight wasn't over, but this reversal had changed everything. I looked at Elena and thought, you just showed the world what real strength looks like. I stepped forward, my voice firm. You've all seen it. They pointed a gun at a resident. They treated a human life like nothing. This is the true face of so-called HOA security. Noise erupted. Someone shouted, record everything. Phones lifted higher, lights flashing, every second captured. Elena never took her eyes off the guard. She repeated herself louder this time, her voice leaving no room for retreat. This is your final order. Drop the weapon. Get on your knees. The guard looked around, sweat pouring down his forehead. He stammered, but his hands could no longer hold the weapon. The sound of metal hitting the brick echoed across the street, and the crowd gasped one. The HOA president's face drained of color, her expression frozen. She hadn't expected things to turn this fast. I saw her eyes blinking rapidly, as if searching for a way to hold on to what little power had just shattered. In that moment, I understood that every act of arrogance, every insult she had ever hurled, would now become evidence against. And Elena, with nothing more than a small but powerful FBI badge, had severed the invisible chain the HOA had wrapped around the residents so long. The entire community stood silent for a few seconds before the noise erupted. I heard someone shout, "She deserved that." Another voice joined in. "We've been silent for too long." I looked at Elena, overflowing with pride and relief. She didn't need to shout, didn't need to grandstand. Just a few sharp words, and everything changed. Elena slipped the badge back into her pocket, then looked directly at the HOA president, her voice firm. "Your time pretending to be the law is over. From this moment on, justice makes the decision." I exhaled quietly, a powerful feeling rising in my chest. All the resentment built up over the years now felt released, and I knew this story was only beginning, but the entire game had just flipped. Call to action. If you witnessed this, whose side would you be on? Comment below. The guard went pale. The tension drained from his face like a man staring into an abyss at his feet. His hand trembled uncontrollably, yet he clung to the gun, his mouth locked in blind defiance. His eyes darted, Elena, then me, then the crowd, as if searching for a way out. He knew he was on the wrong side, but his foolish instincts pushed him to grip the illusion of power he had long used to dominate the resident. Elena calmly drew her Glock from her waist. The motion so clean froze the air. The black metal glinted under the streetlight, and her voice cut through, firm and sharp like a verdict. "Get on your knees. Drop the weapon, now." Her tone wasn't loud, but each word echoed down the block, slicing into every ear watching. The atmosphere pulled tight, every gaze fixed on the moment this bully was forced to face the truth. The guard flinched, his finger twitching on the trigger, lips pressed into a thin line. He had never imagined the day a young woman would confront him so directly, with that level of cold, relentless control. The HOA president stood behind him, her light-colored suit making her stand out amid the crowd. She tilted her chin upward, still trying to project authority, her voice tearing through the air. "You think the FBI can scare me? I am the law here." Her scream rang out like a twisted manifesto. I could hear the madness in every word, a stubbornness fed by years of unchecked, fabricated authority. She truly believed the title of HOA president placed her above everything, including the law itself. Elena let out a cold laugh. It was brief, but enough to send chills through the breathless onlookers. Her gaze swept across the crowd, then locked onto the HOA president's face. Her voice was low, each word slicing like a blade. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." In that moment, I felt the entire dynamic. We were no longer the ones being cornered. Now, it was the false powers facing a brutal reckoning. The guard panicked, sweat streaming down his forehead. He tried to hold the gun, but his eyes were frantically shifting. He was used to bowed heads, fear, to a community that suffered in silence. But now, standing before him was an FBI commander, one who didn't flinch. Elena took a step forward, her voice cutting clean through the air. "You're holding a weapon illegally, threatening a resident, and now actively defying a direct federal order. If you don't want to lose everything, drop the gun now." The guard stepped back half a pace, his finger loosening, breath quick and uneven. But before he could make a choice, the HOA president cut in again, her voice thick with arrogance. "Don't listen to her. We protect standards here. She thinks waving a badge around can rewrite the rules. Pathetic." Whispers rippled through the crowd. People began to split. Some looked at Elena with growing trust. Others stayed uneasy, hesitant to speak. But one thing became clear to everyone. The balance of power had shifted. I stepped forward half a step, my voice rising, not to plead but to expose. "You're all seeing it. This is the real face of the HOA. President president who encourages her subordinate to open fire on a resident, a self-appointed guard aiming a weapon at a woman on her own doorstep. Is this the civilized community we chose to live in? My words landed, and awkward glances followed. Several neighbors avoided my eyes, but I knew they heard me loud and clear. Elena kept the gun trained on the guard, her eyes sharp and cold as fire turned to ice. I won't repeat myself. Drop the weapon, now. His hand trembled, the barrel slowly lowering. His breathing came fast and ragged in the thick silence. Then, the clatter of metal hitting brick tore through the street, the sound ripping apart the false wall of HOA authority that had loomed for so long. Crowd gasped, and a few voices cried out. The HOA president's face turned purple, her hand crushing the strap of her purse like she meant to snap it in two. She shrieked, her voice shrill. What are you doing? Have you forgotten who pays you? Have you forgotten who runs this community? The guard kept his head down, sweat streaming, arms limp at his side. He no longer dared to lift his eyes. Elena didn't lower her gun. She stared directly at the HOA president, a cold smile lingering at the edge of her lip. You just witnessed a live confession? You encouraged him to keep aiming the gun. You declared yourself the law. Every word of it was recorded. All eyes turned to the raised phones. I knew every word, every action had been captured. There was no way out for her now. The HOA president trembled brief, quickly tried to reclaim her lofty tone. You think a few videos can bring me down? You people live here because we keep this place safe and valuable. I'm just doing my job. I cut in, my voice firm. Your job doesn't include turning residents into subjects beneath your feet, and it certainly doesn't include feeding your twisted ego. We pay to live with fairness, not to be terrorized by the HOA. The crowd erupted again. This time it wasn't just whispered. Voices rose in support. That's right, we've put up with this long enough. Elena lowered her gun slightly, but her voice remained sharp as steel. From now on, real law will be enforced, and it's not in your hand. In that moment, I saw the shift in the residents' eyes. Years of fear began to crack, replaced by a deep, long-buried fury. Elena's presence hadn't just turned the tide against a trembling guard. It had exposed the true face of an entire system. I knew from this point forward, nothing would ever return to the way it was. The sound of tires screeching across the pavement rang out, and then dark windbreakers appeared. FBI agents rushed in on the signal Elena had just sent, moving with the precision of a unit waiting backstage. In seconds, the entire stage of power the HOA president had spent years building was ripped apart. Before the guard could react, he was forced to the ground. One agent twisted his arm behind his back, practiced force. The gun kicked away and clattering across the brick, flash of cold steel before it lay still. The sharp click of handcuffs echoed, a clean final note marking the end of a corrupt chapter. The crowd erupted, phones raised, eyes devouring the scene. An agent crouched to search his pockets and waistband. Papers were pulled out, examined. Moments later, the agent shook his head, voice firm. No firearm license, no affiliation with any official security agent. He's a self-appointed enforcer. That statement landed like a gavel in a court. The guard gasped, his face turning white. He no longer struggled. His panicked eyes swept across the crowd, but all he met were looks of disgust and contempt. The HOA president remained standing out front, but her earlier confidence began to crack. She tried to recover, her voice high-pitched and rushed, like someone cornered. This is all a misunderstanding. I was just trying to keep the community safe. You're overreacting. Her words reached every ear, but the impact was the opposite. No one believed the polished speeches she used to preach at HOA meetings anymore. The reality was undeniable. She had incited an unqualified individual to aim a gun at a resident right at their own front gate. A voice called out from the back, hoarse but clear. She once fined my house for planting flowers in the wrong color. The words dropped like a stone in still water, sending ripples outward. Then a man stepped forward, eyes burning. She threatened to seize my home because my American flag on the porch was too large. The crowd stirred louder, each voice adding fuel, stories tumbling out to form a wall of accusation. A middle-aged woman, phone still in hand, shouted, "My son was banned from the pool for being too noisy while her grandkids tore it up every weekend." An elderly man leaned on his cane, his voice trembling but sharp. "She sent a letter threatening to sue me because my daughter's car was parked out front 15 minutes, all just to force us into paying fine." The voices came like a flood, pouring out after years of silence. The residents had been under her control for too long, and now their suppressed rage erupted with force. I looked around and saw faces that once held fear now lifted, eyes burning with fire. Elena stood still, her eyes scanning the crowd, taking in every word. She didn't need to speak. The truth was unveiling itself through the voices of those who had lived under this system. The HOA president stepped back half a step, fake smile twisting on her lips. She raised her hand, trying to shield her face from the phone lights aimed at her, her voice trembling as she clung to control. I was just doing my duty. I was preserving standard. If I didn't, property values would drop and everyone would suffer. A burst of laughter came from somewhere in the crowd. One person shouted, "We don't need you sacrificing our freedom and dignity to protect property value. You use the HOA to enrich yourself and control us." The crowd exploded, a wave of shouting that mixed anger and relief. Her face flushed red, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping on dry land. I took a deep breath, then spoke, not loud, clear. "You've all seen it. This isn't security. This is an abuse of power. The one meant to keep order was used as a weapon of fear, and the one at the top twisted the rules into shackles to humiliate everyone." My words dropped, and the crowd went still for a second. Then voices of agreement rang out. Someone yelled, "That's right!" Another followed with, "Enough!" and the wave swelled again. The guard was dragged aside by agents, his head down. Phone lights followed, exposing the shame of a man who had once brandished a gun without fear. Elena stepped forward half a pace, her gaze sweeping the crowd, her voice calm, cutting. "No one has the right to use the HOA to oppress residents. A title does not place her above the law. People may have stayed silent for years, but the truth is out now. The whole country will see this." The crowd roared, phones raised even higher, live streams broadcasting in real time. Comments flooded the screen, notifications chiming non-stop. This was no longer a neighborhood issue. It had gone public. There was no hiding anymore. The HOA president was visibly trembling, her voice cracking apart. I didn't mean it that way. This is all a misunderstanding. I only wanted to keep community nice." A man shouted from the back. "You fined me $500 for leaving my trash bin out for 2 hours. That's your idea of nice?" A woman cut in, her voice breaking. "You threatened to auction my house because I couldn't pay HOA dues on time. Is that what you call protecting the community?" Each accusation landed like a hammer, forcing her into the shadow. Her eyes darted wildly, searching for someone to agree, but no one nodded. Those who once bowed their heads had now turned their back, leaving only look of contempt. I stood beside Elena, my chest swelling. The truth had come into the light, not through a single defense or excuse, but through the wounds carried by the community. Those wounds had now become living evidence. An FBI agent forward, rapidly taking notes on every accusation. One person raised their hand, asking to speak in detail. Another rushed to provide emails and documents they had once received. People lined up as if they had been waiting for this moment their entire life. I looked at Elena. She gave a slight nod, her expression steady and serious. She knew this was the turning point. Silence had been broken, and from this moment forward, justice was stepping in. Amid the noise of testimonies, I heard a small voice, sharp as a blade. "It's time we stopped being afraid." I turned to see an elderly woman, silver-haired, her hands shaking as she held up a crumpled citation. She raised it high, her voice cracking but firm. She turned this place into a prison, but today, that prison fell. The crowd erupted, cheers echoing down the street. Faces once lowered in submission now lit up, eyes bright with release. I drew a deep breath, letting the sound fill my lung. I knew the battle wasn't over, but the wall of fear had crumbled, and once the truth is out, it can never be buried again. The noise from the crowd had barely settled when an agent stepped forward, holding a thick folder. He gave Elena a small nod, then opened it for all to see. The printed pages were clear, accompanied by email screenshots marked in red. His voice rang out steady, each word slicing through the air. In an email sent to subordinates, the HOA president gave this direct, "Make sure those people of color know who really runs this." The space froze. Breaths were held, mouths hung open, and I felt my blood boil. That vicious sentence landed like a blade straight into the pride of every resident who had ever been looked down on. I clenched my fist, fingernails digging deep into my skin. Beneath the rage, I also felt a surge of satisfaction rise in my chest. For so long, she had hidden behind the mask of protecting community value, but now the mask was off. Every excuse about maintaining standards had been exposed as a cover for something deeply diseased. Elena stepped forward, her eyes sharp as fire. She stared directly at the woman, her voice ringing out clearly. "You didn't just abuse power, you committed a federal crime." The HOA president backed up a step, face covered in heavy makeup, now revealed every crack and tremble under the harsh white light. Her mouth moved, stammering, "No, that's not from me." But her shaking voice betrayed every ounce of confidence she once wore. The crowd erupted like a crashing wave. A woman shouted, "She's a racist! Caught in her own email, and she still denies it?" Another pointed a phone at her face, voice dripping with mockery. "This is the woman we've been paying all these years." An elderly man leaned on his cane, his voice rough and low. "I've lived through many decades, but I've never seen hypocrisy this blatant. She turned the HOA into a weapon to humiliate others." I looked looked around and saw the eyes of the black and brown families in the neighborhood lighting up, not with fear anymore, but with fury and unity. They had endured enough, and now, the proof in plain sight had given them their voice. The HOA president raised a hand, as if pleading for rescue, but no one stood with her. Even her once loyal allies stepped back, avoiding her gaze. Elena didn't let her slip away. Her voice was ice cold. Every email has a timestamp, a sender, and a recipient. There's no room for denial. You used HOA authority to turn this neighborhood into a platform for discrimination, and now you'll answer for it. Another agent spoke firmly. We've gathered sufficient evidence. This isn't just a civil violation. This constitutes federal-level criminal conduct involving racial discrimination, threats against residents. That sound hit like a hammer, sealing the escape. She staggered, hands trembling, clutching her handbag. The red lipstick that once signaled power now smeared across her pale face like a ridiculous stain. A young woman in the crowd broke into tears, her voice cracking. My family was forced to sell our home. Now I understand why. It wasn't the lawn, it was our skin color. The crowd erupted, their outrage rising into a collective roar. Enough! Accusations flew in all directions, painting the full picture. Threatening letters, baseless fines, forced compliance, each with the same common thread, aimed at those who didn't share the same skin color or background. I stood in the middle, listening, my body trembling. Part of it was fury. Part of it was the raw joy of truth, finally exploding free. It felt like the collar around everyone's neck had just been broken. Elena raised a hand, and the crowd quieted slightly. She turned to the woman, her voice slow and razor-sharp. You believed you were the law, but the law doesn't rest in your hands. It lives in justice, and justice is standing right here. An agent's forward, placing a firm hand on the HOA president's shoulder. Clear signal her time was up. She jerked away, stammering. I did it for the community. I just wanted to protect the elegant. But no one believed her anymore. Every eye had become a verdict. I stepped forward, stared straight at her, and spoke clenched teeth. You nearly got my daughter shot for your twisted pride. You terrorized dozens of families. Now we all see clearly. You were never protecting elegant. You were preserving a dictatorship built on discrimination. She lowered her head, while murmurs rolled through the crowd like a storm. A man shouted, "Take her away!" Another followed, "Yes, don't let her stay here another second." The HOA president shook violently, her steps faltering, makeup streaked down her face, her eyes wide with panic. Fortress of power around her had crumbled, leaving only a stripped figure surrounded by truth. Elena didn't look away. Her gaze stayed locked on the woman, as if to carve this moment into stone, a warning to anyone who dared dream of such tyranny again. I looked at my daughter and saw pride and steel in every motion. She hadn't just unmasked tyrant. She had given this community a glimpse of justice. The agent gripped her shoulder tighter, ready to escort her out. I heard someone crying in the crowd, but it wasn't fear. It was relief. In that moment, I knew with certainty no one would ever bow again. Call to action. In your opinion, how should someone who weaponizes HOA power to commit racial discrimination be held accountable? Comment below. The chaos from the crowd surged like a wave. The people, silent for years, now poured into the street, phones raised, voices shouting nonstop. Screens glowed as live streams captured the HOA president being handcuffed by federal agents, while cheers of satisfaction spread in every direction. There was no trace of hesitation left, only an explosion of energy as the figure they had feared for so long was finally exposed. A woman's voice rang out, piercing the night. This day finally came. Applause followed, loud and relentless. A bearded man, once quietly fined for a few flower pots in his yard, raised a fist toward the sky. She deserved it. Chants echoed down the block. The whole community felt as if a 1,000-pound burden had been lifted. Fear that once made them bow now turned into laughter. Children clapped behind their parents, not fully grasping the moment, feeling the unmistakable energy of a celebration. The HOA president, still wearing her light-colored suit, once a symbol of her false authority, thrashed in handcuffs. She screamed, her voice high and metallic like scraping steel. I'm the HOA president. I have authority. I am the law here. But her scream carried no weight anymore. It only made the crowd laugh louder. A middle-aged resident mocked, "Authority? You mean the power to bully us?" Another added, "Or the power to turn our neighborhood into a prison?" Her face twisted. The layers of makeup once used to mask now smudged under the glare of dozens of phone cameras. Her eyes darted, searching for support, but all she found were looks of disgust. The same people who clapped for her at meetings now turned their back, recording silently to add to the mountain of evidence. Elena stood tall, her weapon holstered, but her voice rang out, firm and commanding. In this country, No one is above the law. The words sliced through the night like a blade, landing in the center of the crowd, silencing them for a beat. Then cheers erupted, swelling into a chorus. Some clapped until their hands reddened, others shouted, and some wept. It was the moment the community realized they no longer had to kneel to false power. An elderly man, once fined repeatedly for flying a too large American flag, stepped forward, his voice raspy but resolute. "This is justice. We've waited too long for this day." I stood in the middle of the crowd, feeling my heartbeat sink every cheer. In my eyes, Elena was no longer the little girl I once walked to school with. She was now a symbol of true strength. She had done what no one else dared to do, and now the entire community reaped the reward of her courage. The HOA president screaming, but her voice cracked, broken with desperation. "You'll regret this. I'll come back. I'll sue all of you." Laughter broke out in response. A young woman called out, her voice icy. "Come back where? To your jail cell?" Her words sent the crowd into another burst of laughter. An agent held the woman's arm firmly, escorting her through 2 lines of people. Phone screens lit her every shaky step, capturing it all. Shouts rang out from every direction. "Goodbye, fake law! Enjoy your shackles!" I took a deep breath, flooded with a sense of release. For years, this community had been bound by fear. People stayed silent under pressure, lowered their heads when humiliated, and looked away when neighbors were wrongfully punished. But now, that wall had fallen. A teenage boy held up his phone, filming with trembling hands while laughing. "I'm posting this online. The world's gonna see who she really is." Elena nodded, her eyes steady. She knew this moment didn't belong to just us. It belonged to everyone who had ever been stepped on. Applause, cheers, and sobs blended into a single wave. I heard the choked weeping of a woman standing on her porch, holding 2 children tight. She whispered, "Finally get to live like human beings." That night, the quiet street turned into a public courtroom. But unlike cold courtrooms behind 4 walls, justice here lived in the eyes, the shout, the unity. The people were no longer defendants on trial. They were the witnesses and the jury. Elena stepped back, letting the community speak. She understood that justice doesn't come from orders or handcuffs alone, from collective strength. And tonight, that strength had awakened. A man shouted, "We need to meet! Draft a petition! Replace the entire HOA board!" His call was met with roaring agreement. Crowd shouted in unison, "Yes, that's right!" I looked at Elena and saw her smile faintly. She didn't have to say it. I knew what she was thinking. Justice doesn't end when the guilty are cuffed. It continues in rebuilding something fair. As the agent led the HOA president around the corner and out of sight, the cheers still echoed down the street. I looked up at the night sky and felt a new wind passing through. In that wind, I could hear the whispers of years of pain turning into a song of freedom. Tonight, justice stepped into the heart of the community, and from now on, no one would dare to invoke the name of the HOA to trample on someone's dignity again. The blaring of news vans echoed non-stop, and flashing lights lit up the once quiet street. Within hours, the story had spread everywhere, drawing reporters and camera crews in droves. Microphones crowded forward, shutters snapped rapidly as the image of the HOA president in her light-colored suit and handcuffs appeared before them. A bold red headline splashed across online news banners. HOA president arrested for racial discrimination and ordering use of firearms. That headline spread like wildfire. Within minutes, social media was flooded with videos posted by residents. Clips were trimmed, replayed, and circulated, capturing her screaming, the trembling guard being restrained, and Elena revealing her FBI badge with icy authority. Each frame became undeniable evidence. The numbers soared like a flood. Millions of shares, tens of millions of views. People commented with rage, satisfaction, and disbelief. One wrote, "She got what she deserved. This is what happens when someone thinks they're above the law." Another posted, "Every word in her email made my skin crawl. This isn't just a neighborhood issue, it's a reflection of a national problem." In the neighborhood, the atmosphere ignited. Families who had been silent for years now spoke up together. They stepped into the crowd, holding violation letters, absurd notices, and threatening emails they had hidden in silence. A middle-aged man, voice thick with emotion, told reporters, "We were fined for our skin color. Our lawn wasn't green enough," she said. "It was a sign of neglect. But we knew. She targeted us because we didn't look like." A young woman raised a faded violation notice. "We were humiliated for speaking out. My husband questioned why fees kept rising. And the next day, we got a warning for community disruption. That so-called community was just a tool to keep us in line." An elderly man, hands trembling but eyes fierce, said, "She forced me to take down the American flag from my porch, claiming it was too large and ruined the view. But everyone saw it. Problem wasn't the flag, it was the fact that I'm the only person of color on this street." The stories burst forth like water from a dam long ready to break. One voice followed another, no one holding back. Reporters scribbled, cameras followed every word. Faces that once bowed under pressure now lifted, turning resentment into testimony. I stood in the middle of it all, listening to each voice, overwhelmed by a complex wave of emotion, anger, release, bitterness, for the years of silent suffering, but within it, fierce satisfaction. Finally, the truth had been laid bare for the world to see. Elena stood beside me, her face cold but her eyes blazing. She knew this moment wasn't just a personal victory, but a turning point. Her voice rang out, not loud, but powerful enough to carry. This is no longer about one individual. This is a lesson for every community. No one has the right to turn an HOA into a whip used against its own resident. The crowd responded. Cheers erupt, not of mockery this time, but of unity. A man shouted, "We've been afraid for too long." Not anymore. Another added, "This is the moment justice arrived." The HOA president, restrained in handcuffs, stood pale and panicked. Her arrogance, the threats of "I am the law," had dissolved into a fading echo. She tried to speak, but her hoarse cries were ignored by all. Reporters rushed in, shoving microphones forward. "Do you have anything to say?" She stammered a few words, but they were drowned in the mocking laughter of the resident. Her voice now carried no power, only the pitiful tone of someone exposed and defeated. An elderly woman from the community began to cry, not out of fear, but relief. Her voice trembled. "We've lived in silence for too long. Every day we opened our doors to fine, to threat, but today it ends." The crowd erupted in applause, no one holding back. They pushed forward, recounting stories, showing evidence, presenting photos, filling the case against her. Reporters captured every detail, turning buried stories into weapons of justice. Elena scanned the crowd, then spoke, her voice sharp as an arrow. "Remember this moment. Silent is what feeds tyranny. But when we speak together, no one can oppress us forever." The community burst into cheers. "That's right!" Voices rang out, hands lift, faces lit up. There was no more hesitation, no more fearful glances, only contempt remained for the HOA president and the system she built. In the glow of dozens of cameras, her image, being led away, became a symbol of disgraceful collapse. She once walked like a queen through this neighborhood. Now she staggered like a fallen tyrant amid a chorus of scorn. I looked at my daughter, pride swelling in my chest. She didn't just save our family from the barrel of a gun. She saved the entire community from a regime. I knew this moment wouldn't be remembered as just another scandal, but as a milestone of change. And amid the roar of vindication, I told myself, justice may come late, but when it arrives, it crushes all deceit, leaving only the raw truth, forcing the once powerful to bow their head. That night, our community no longer feared her. All that remained was contempt for who she was and the belief that we had finally reclaimed our voice. The following morning, before the sun had fully risen and the eastern edge of the sky was just beginning to blush with light, a special report aired across nearly every major news network. The face of the HOA president appeared on screen, not the usual fabricated glamour with bright red lips, blown-out hair, and a cold smile, but a defeated figure escorted by 2 federal agents, her wrinkled suit barely holding together her dignity. The headline scrolling across the bottom left, "No room for misinterpretation. HOA president indicted on multiple federal charges." In that moment, I knew the storm had finally ripped off every mask. Inside our small, Elena had been awake long before dawn. She sat silently at the old wooden table, the yellow overhead light casting sharp angles on her, making it seem even more resolute. In front of her was a red file stamped classified. I sat across from her, watching her through each page. With every turn, I saw time falling. Years of silence, fearful glances, buried story. Her face showed no emotion, but I knew this wasn't just about our family anymore. This was the work of a citizen, of someone who knew the truth and refused to look away. When Elena picked up her pen and signed the indictment, her handwriting was bold, final, as if sealing the fate of a decayed regime left unchecked far too long. Once the final signature was complete, an agent stepped forward. He wore a simple shirt and an agency badge, but his eyes were serious. He gave a slight nod, accepted the file, and stated plainly, "The indictment is now in effect. As of this moment, the case has been elevated to federal court." His words were not loud, but they carried the full weight of the moment, silencing the room into stillness. Outside, residents gathered early. They weren't shouting or demanding anything. They brought paperwork, audio recording, photograph, evidence they had hidden for years, unsure who to trust, afraid to speak. Now, they handed it directly to Elena. Not because she was my daughter, but because she had become a symbol of truth. She took each, listened carefully, wrote down every word, as though piecing together the full portrait of a system that had controlled an entire community far too long. At the temporary detention center, the same guard who had pointed a gun at my daughter now slumped in the interrogation room, his eyes glazed, his body limp like a soaked rag. Gone was the smugness, the sneer, the glare that once screamed, "I am the law here," the look that had made so many shrink in fear. The preliminary report was released. He faced charges of illegal possession and use of a firearm, threatening the safety of residents, and was under investigation for suspect ties to internal racketeering. I listened, not with satisfaction, but with a quiet, heavy heart, because finally, justice had found its. A man who once imagined himself a king in his tiny empire was now an anonymous detainee, shackled like every other tyrant who had gone far. But at the heart of the case was still the HOA president. The stack of files piled high on the investigation desk contained pages that would chill anyone who read them. Each line of accusation revealed a pattern of orchestrated conduct, systemic racial discrimination, abuse of power for personal gain, deliberate instructions to use weapons as a means of intimidating residents, incitement of security staff to act violently toward households deemed non-compliant with HOAs. One charge after another fell like hammer strikes upon a monument already decayed from within. The local court convened an emergency session to announce the list of indictments. Reporters packed the hallways, microphones raised like a forest, flashes exploding in rapid succession. When the spokesperson read her name aloud, the room filled with a low murmur, not of surprise, but of confirmation. People had waited for this day far too long. The list of charges read like a scroll: racial discrimination, abuse of authority in HOA administration, unlawful seizure of private property, armed threat, illegal profiteering through improper citation. Inside the interrogation room, she sat silent under the white light, still wearing the same pale suit from the night before, now wrinkled, stained with faded lipstick and sweat. Her cuffed hands rested on the metal table, tapping faintly as though she still believed she could set the tempo of the game, but all power had slipped from her grasp. Feeble justifications were quickly drowned out by irrefutable evidence. Internal emails ordering action against non-compliant residents, security footage capturing conversations laced with contempt. I stood outside the one-way glass, watched. With each metallic clink of the cuff, I saw fragments of her former arrogance crumble, and I thought to myself, she dug her own grave. Elena stepped up beside me and placed a hand on my shoulder. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was steady and clear. "Dad, just doesn't need to shout. Just needs to be honest." I turned to look at her and saw the fire in her eye. Not a spark of triumph, but an unshakable belief in justice. The news spread like wildfire. Social media erupt comment, shares, and react. Someone wrote, "This is a wake-up call to every HOA across the country." Another commented, "If not for that young woman, that community might still be living under silent oppression." Back in the neighborhood, a completely different atmosphere had taken hold. Those who once lived with heads bowed now stood tall. They gathered to discuss rebuilding a new board, transparent, fair, and elected by the people themselves. The American flag flew again on front porch, no longer ordered down. Colorful flower beds bloomed like silent declarations. Freedom had returned. Children's laughter echoed through the corners of the community. No more fear, no more absurd restrictions. A man who had once been kicked out of the pool under vague safety regulations now returned with his son. He looked at me, eyes red with emotion. "I never thought I'd truly live in peace here. Thanks to Elena, that's now a reality." I smiled, pride swelling in my chest, but it was a heavy pride. I knew this fight wasn't over. The systems of discrimination and abuse of power still lingered in many places, but at least here, in my community, we had stood up and reclaimed what should have been ours from the beginning. At the first community meeting after the incident, Elena was invited to speak. She stepped up to the simple wooden podium. No notes, no rehearsal. Her voice rang out, firm and clear. "I'm not a hero. I just did what any citizen is supposed to do. When power is abused, we cannot stay silent. Justice doesn't belong to the loudest voice, but to the honest actions of each of us." Crowd erupted. An elderly woman jumped to her feet and shouted, "God bless you!" Then the chant took over. "Justice! Justice!" That night, Elena and I walked down our familiar street. Every house had its lights on, doors unlocked, voices drifting out, news reports echoing, children playing, erasing every trace of the suffocating suffocating atmosphere that once smothered. The citation notices that had once been nailed to front doors were now ripped up and tossed in the trash. That scene, to me, was more beautiful than anything ever praised as standard. Elena paused by a fence, her hand brushing the white slat, then turned to me. Dad, I never thought I'd have to flash my FBI badge right at our doorstep. But without that moment, nothing would have changed. I nodded, eyes stinging. We both knew this story wasn't over. The trial would drag on, debates and public scrutiny. But the most important thing had already happened. She had been taken down, and the community had reclaimed its voice. I looked up at the night sky, stars glinting like silent witnesses to this historic moment, and I whispered, needing no one to hear, justice isn't some distant thing. It begins the moment we refuse to bow. In the days that followed, the neighborhood changed so rapidly that it left me stunned. Everything felt as if it had just weathered an earthquake, not the kind that topples houses, but one that shakes the very foundation of silence. This street had once lived beneath a false veneer of order. Every paved stone, every perfectly trimmed hedge, every lipped smile from a neighbor, all were signs of a community ruled by fear. Each HOA meeting, the so-called Homeowners Association, felt more like a Sikh tribunal, where the HOA president sat perched on a chair like a judge, clutching a microphone like a scepter, her eyes darting as if to catch every breath out of line. Those meetings weren't spaces for dialogue, they were sentencing halls. She didn't read minutes, she issued vague fines and ambiguous rules hung like spended blades, ready to fall on anyone who dared to be different. But now it's the chair at the front. No more cautious glances aimed that. No more words every time. Instead, I see familiar faces. People I once quiet, people who were fine. Now, the HOA no long tool of no more the rem. A new bulletin board has been installed at the entrance of the neighborhood, large and clean. But for the first time in years, it's not plastered with warning. No bright red signs reading, unauthorized plants forbidden, or vehicles parked over 10 minutes will be fined. Instead, it bears an invitation. Let's rewrite the rules of living together. Below it, blank sheets are pinned, and anyone can write what they want to see in their community. I walked past and noticed the scrawled handwriting of a child. Please let us play ball on the grass. No fancy word, no slogans, just a wish to do something ordinary. And beneath that line were dozens of adult signatures, people who used to hold their breath when their children laughed too loudly. I stood there, deeply moved. It struck me that even something as simple as a child's laugh had once been strangled by those who claimed to speak for the law. The residents are now unmistakably more open. No more passing each other with reluctant nods. On the sidewalks, groups gather, chatting animatedly, sharing old stories as if peeling layers of dust from memories long buried. The middle-aged man, once forced by the HOA to remove his American flag from the front porch for being aesthetic pollution, now hangs an even larger one, a clean flag, full of wind. And this time, neighbors don't complain. They stop by to congratulate him. An elderly woman, once made to uproot her colorful flower beds for disrupting the landscape, now replants them, each bloom vibrant color, restored to a black and white painting. People bring her extra pot, linger to talk as the sun dips low, their laughter no longer muted by fear. Elena and I often sit together on the porch in the evening, that small, weathered porch that once came with threats of fines for not being painted in the approved color code. The breeze carries the scent of freshly cut grass and the sound of children playing at the nearby park. Elena still doesn't say much, but her gaze has changed. It's no longer alert, it's calm, as if she's finally found a place where she can sit without keeping her back straight in case she has to react. Once, as we sat in silence for a while, Elena turned and said, her voice low and steady, "Real power is about protection, not humiliation." Her words pierced me, not just because of what she had faced, the gun, threat, the bitter stares, but because I knew that she, through calmness and courage, had rekindled something in people, the sense that they deserved to be treated with dignity. My daughter didn't need to shout, didn't need to wave her arms. Her honest presence alone brought down an entire fraudulent structure. I remember the journey. An evening that should have been ordinary, blocked at the gate by a man with a gun. The man everyone in the neighborhood had silently accepted as necessary for security. He didn't just aim the weapon, he aimed contempt at the dignity of every resident. He embodied everything wrong, power placed in the wrong hands, a community bowed by fear of trouble, and rules twisted to suit the power. But that very night, Elena stepped forward, not retreating, not begging, not exploding in anger, just one steady look and one sentence, whole storm of power off balance. From that moment, something broke. Not blood, not violence, silence. When one person stands upright, hundreds realize they can too. When one voice speaks the truth, hundreds of others begin to find their way out of throats that have been choked for years. The story closes with a satisfying end. The HOA president, who once walked as if the entire neighborhood were her personal stage, now quietly slips away from the meeting. No one speaks her name with regret. No one sees her as a symbol of order anymore. What she built to control others, the convoluted rules, the loyal enforcers, has now become the very chains that bind her. Word has spread that she's facing a class action lawsuit from residents, that the HOA's accounts are to be audited, and that every past fine will be reviewed. The shadow of control has vanished, swept away by the fresh wind of justice. I look around the neighborhood and feel a rebirth. Children run and play on the sidewalks without fear of being scolded. Adults gather on porches, sipping morning coffee, sharing stories instead of nodding in silence. No more weary sighs, no more resigned headshake. Justice wasn't delivered by any Supreme Court, but by the people themselves, the ones who had once been silent, now learning how to speak. I exhale, a long breath releasing years of pressure. A quiet faith rises in me, that when truth is exposed, darkness eventually fades. And if there's one thing I want to hold on to from everything that happened, it's Elena's eyes that night. Eyes that knew no fear and refused to let anyone live in it ever again. As I sit down to write the full account of what happened, the story unspools like a film wrapped around memory. It all began on what should have been an ordinary afternoon when Elena and I drove back into our neighborhood. The gate was familiar, the brick road gleamed under the light, yet it had become the stage for confrontation. A man calling himself HOA Security stood in front of the car, eyes sharp with suspicion, voice laced with contempt. He looked at my vehicle with disdain, throwing insults at both me and my daughter. His hand hovered over his gun, arrogance dripping from every word, setting into motion a chain of events that could never be undone. From a distance, the HOA president appeared in a pale suit, face heavily made up, transparently false. She lifted her chin and sneered at us in front of the neighbors, openly declaring who did and didn't fit in the community. I remember Elena's eyes then, restrained, burning, her hand gripping mine tight, anchoring us both. But the president didn't stop. When the guard drew his weapon and pointed it straight at my daughter, every ounce of long-held restraint shattered under the weight of it. Elena stepped forward, pulled out her badge, her voice cold as a blade. "You just pointed a gun at the FBI tactical commander." That sentence shattered the entire facade of power the HOA had. The crowd froze, the guard trembled, and the HOA president still stubbornly shouted that she was the law. But in that very moment, the balance shifted. Elena didn't just save herself and her family. She ignited a full-scale. FBI agents swarmed in, subdued the guard, inspected his credentials, and confirmed he had none. He was just a self-appointed enforcer. As residents watched him being cuffed, murmurs spread. People began sharing what they had endured, fined planting the wrong flower, threatened with home seizure because their American flag was too large, forced to pay unjustified fees. Humiliations long suppressed now burst forth. The turning point came when the FBI revealed the HOA president's email. Every sentence laid bare blatant discrimination. "Make sure those people of color know who really owns the place." The crowd erupted. There was no room left for denial. People cried, people shouted, held up old violation letters, and spoke about years of oppression. I listened, my blood boiling, but also felt a wave of vindication rising. Justice found undeniable proof. She thrashed and screamed that she was the president, that she held the power, but laughter rained down, sharp and scornful. Elena declared coolly, "In this country, no one is above the law." Cheers broke out. Residents live streamed, and images of her in handcuffs spread across the internet. Within hours, national headlines exploded in red. HOA president arrested for racial discrimination, firearm misconduct. That disgrace was unprecedented. The video was shared millions of times, and long-buried stories were brought to light. Families stepped forward, declaring they had been fined for their skin color, their income, their defiance. The community was no longer afraid. Only contempt remained, aimed squarely at her and the system she built. Elena signed the indictment order, and the agent immediately announced the charges. The guard was indicted for illegal possession of a firearm, while the HOA president faced a string of offenses: racial discrimination, abuse of HOA authority, armed threats, and unlawful coercion. I heard the sound of handcuffs locking and silently thought, she dug her own grave. My daughter looked at me, her voice calm. "Dad, justice doesn't need noise, only clarity." This outcome was not punishment for an individual. It was a wake-up call. No longer could HOA hide behind the name of purity to rule over residents. Every meeting since had changed. The people sat as equal, debates were lively, and no one stood on a platform to issue. Residents became open, smiling, sharing stories, no longer bowing their heads at the sight of another warning letter. I remember one afternoon, Elena and I sat on our front porch, watching children play on the lawn that had once been off-limit. The colorful flower beds had returned, and the American flag flew proudly in the breeze. Elena said, "Real power protect. It doesn't humiliate." I nodded. nodded, knowing that this lesson would go far beyond our neighborhood. This story ends with a deeply satisfying resolution because an arrogant figure who thought she was untouchable was ultimately crushed by justice. But more than that, it leaves behind profound lessons. First, silence is fertile ground for abuse. Every time we choose silence, the authoritarian takes one step further. When one person dares to rise, truth spreads, and the whole community can reclaim its voice. Second, justice is not a gift handed down from above. It is the result of courage. Elena could have stayed silent, could have let the gun press against her face without a word, but she stepped forward and script. That moment changed everything. Any one of us can be that spark, as long as we dare to speak truth and stand tall. Third, false power is never lasting. The HOA president may have ruled by fear. Fear does not endure. When truth is brought to light, the masks crack, revealing the bare face of corruption. And when that happens, collapse becomes inevitable. Finally, the greatest thing I've learned is this: justice doesn't need to shout. It doesn't lie in the screams of those in power, but in the decisive, honest actions of ordinary people. A well-timed act, a steady voice, can shift course of an entire community. Looking back, I know this wasn't just a story about one abusive HOA. It's a mirror for every place, every person. No matter the neighborhood, no matter the circumstance, never let silence feed the darkness. Remember, it takes only one person to speak truth, dozens, even hundreds to stand behind them. And from there, justice finds its way back. I close this story with the belief anywhere people are united and brave enough to confront injustice, there will come a day when darkness is torn apart. And when that day comes, we don't just reclaim justice for ourselves. We leave behind a legacy for future generations. That justice always exists, and no one, not even those who believe themselves untouchable, can stand above the law.